April edition of the Farmers Supply Association Agriculture Report. I'm Randy Klepechka, agronomist with Farmers Supply Association. Well, planting season is finally here. You know, I've had programs seem like the last 6 months or so. It's been kind of a broken record. All I've talked about is, you know, the delayed harvest, the wet fields, you know, the rutted up fields, the delayed, you know, the weather being cold and wet and just hard to get anything done in the field. Finally, in late March, things started picking up a little bit. Still haven't been perfect by any stretch, but, you know, farmers have been able to get in the field, get a lot of field work done. Planting, the first rice that I was aware of being planted was on March the 22nd. That was the only one person I knew planted that early, but there was some planted that date, a little bit the next week. And then on April 1st, things picked up quite a bit more. That was a Monday, and things were starting to dry out. Farmers had some, you know, ground ready to go. So planting picked up on the 1st of April, and some people went full bore between the 1st and 3rd before we had rain on the 4th. And some people waited. You know, some people still got fields that need to be worked up and prepared for planting. The soil temperature was still cool, still cooler than what we wanted on April 1st and 2nd in that period. So some people just waited, concentrated on working ground. So it's kind of a mixed bag. Some guys have planted full bore. You know, I've heard 600-700 acres from some people, maybe more for some that have been planted, and some people have not started yet. So, you know, hopefully we'll get some weather to pick things up again here before long. By the way, we're taping on April the 5th, so as a reference point for what I'm talking about today. Also, some corn planting has gone on as well. You know, a lot of people plant corn first, but it's kind of been some of both going on at the same time, corn being planted and rice being planted as well. For those guys that got some rice planted, hopefully they got a pre-emergent herbicide out. You know, and with those pre's, we're talking about either command or a command facet combination, you know, or premix, such as Obey or something like that. So hopefully they got that done, because we got a great activating rainfall on the 4th of April that took people out of the field. But for those guys that had you know, rice planted and had that pre-emergence herbicide out there, it was outstanding to get it activated. Anywhere from about 3/4 inch in the north part of our area, and then if you get further south, some places got too much. You know, I heard some, you know, 3-4 inch amount totals as you get further south. But right here in the northern part of our area, certainly some excellent 3/4 inch activating rainfalls. You know, last month our topic was overlapping residuals. So hopefully those guys that got that command or command facet out there are going to be looking for that opportunity to get that overlap out there. Ideally, you want to get, you know, the first herbicide activated, and then before it runs out and in front of another rain, then you want to get another residual herbicide out there and keep that residual going, you know, on through flood. A lot of options out there. Bolero Prowl is a real good mix there. Also something like a Facet Prowl, a Facet Bolero, more Command, or something like a Rice 1, which is a premix of Command and Prowl, would be an excellent choice for these situations. So you got a lot of choices there. You know, the bottom line, just get something out there before another rainfall. As we've said many times, you want to keep stuff from coming up, so keep that residual active all the way through flooding. What I want to talk about today, probably more than anything, is recording your rice emergence dates and getting your fields enrolled in the DD50. And before you turn off, you know, the tape or anything, I know a lot of you out there probably saying, well, I don't use DD50 anymore, it's kind of outdated or something like that. You know, I don't believe so, and I still think there's some good uses for that, especially one date on there. You know, this isn't my old standard DD50 PR promotion that I used to do when I was a county extension agent. You know, we were trying to, you know, obviously when you're working for somebody, you want to get all the acres you can in a program, especially, you know, if you're an extension agent or something like that. So I always did, you know, standard promotional programs about the DD50 program, but this really isn't it. I know the DD50 program isn't as popular as it used to be. Things have changed. But there's one date on that printout that I think is very, very important, and I think it's very critical that you have. So, you know, for that reason, for just that one date, if nothing else, I really think you need to run a DD50, or at least be set up to run a DD50 if you need to later, a little later in the season. That that date on there that I was talking about that I think you really need to have is the one that says final recommended time to apply pre-flood nitrogen. You know, you got an optimum window there, and then after that optimum window, you have the final recommended time to apply pre-flood nitrogen. And I think you really need to have that date. I think if it's one of those years when you know, it stays wet, it's rainy, and you can't get dry ground to put that pre-flood nitrogen on, you really need to know this date. There's a couple of things that back during the fall and winter that, you know, that I saw that really kind of made me realize we need to be pushing this more than we have in the past. I mean, I've known it all along, this date was real important, but I saw a couple of things back during the fall and winter that really verified that it is important and that people need to know what that date is. Number one, I was called to look at a field in our area, in our customer area, and they were cutting a field of 153, and the yields were really down in that field, much lower than you would expect. I mean, we'd been seeing, you know, some sporadic yields, especially with our varieties back in the fall, but this field was really quite a bit lower than the rest of them. So, you know, they wanted me to come out there, and some other people were also looking at it as well, trying to figure out what was going on. You know, I thought maybe there's a disease out there or something like that. You know, we saw the Cercospora leaf blight back in the fall, and thought maybe it might be that. And we saw a little bit of that out there, and, you know, thought it could be some other things, maybe some herbicide drift or something like that. But when I got out there and looked at it, the one thing I did see was that the panicles were very short in this field, and I told them, well, it's not a disease or anything that's happened late in the season. Something happened early in the season for these panicles to be this short, and, you know, for us to be cutting these kind of yields. So, you know, we kind of put our heads together and really thought that that was probably it, that pre-flood nitrogen was applied and activated too late, and that really hampered the yield on that. So, you know, we're not sure of that, but we felt like that was probably the best explanation for that. Another thing, during the winter meeting season, Jared Hartke, the state rice specialist, showed a slide at that meeting, and it had applying your pre-flood nitrogen at various dates from real early to real late, and it showed a graph of the yield potential, you know, the yields at those different dates, and the yields were really steady until you got to that final recommended date that we talked about on the DD50. After the applications were past that date, those yields started dropping significantly, and I mean they started right at that date, right at that timing that's on the DD50. So, you know, that made me realize that we've got something here. We need to be emphasizing this a lot more than we have, that it really can be hurting rice yields significantly if you're not paying attention to this. It is more pronounced with varieties like 151 and 153, and I think it's probably more pronounced because those varieties get to that final date quicker than some of the other varieties and hybrids do. So it's probably more pronounced at those. You've got to get that fertilizer out quicker on those two Clearfield varieties because there's that quick, you know, during that vegetative stage, and you need that nitrogen out early. Diamond and the medium grains also kind of drop off pretty quickly, but they have a longer window. You don't get to that final date with the medium grains and diamond until a little bit later past the Clearfield 151 and 153. So you can have a steep drop-off with those varieties, but it's not going to happen as quickly, so they're a little more forgiving as well because of that. The hybrids don't drop off quite as much. I mean, they have a drop-off after that final date, but it's not as significant, not as steep as over those varieties. So that just shows you probably 151 and 153 are most critical with this. Then your other your other varieties such as Diamond and the medium grains like Titan and Jupiter. And then we go on to the hybrids being a little, you know, more forgiving and a little less critical on that final date. So, you know, the bottom line, I think you need to know when that your emergence date is, and when that final recommended time to apply your nitrogen is. And Jared made a really good point at our winter meetings this year. It's not only when that fertilizer application needs to be made, it's when it's activated. So if you've got a field that takes a long time to flood up, you really need to be pushing that nitrogen application earlier if you possibly can. So, you know, if we get into those situations where it is wet and you're seeing that final date there, you got to do something. I know we'd rather wait till it's dry, but if you wait way past that final recommended date, you're losing a lot of yield. So, as I always tell people, sometimes you just got to make the best choice out of the bad choices, and that's maybe up your pre-flood nitrogen rate. and go ahead and get some out there and then get the flood across it. Or some people go to the spoon feeding route as well. But get some nitrogen out there, preferably the big shot before that last date, and get it activated before that last date if you possibly can. So record the emergent states as they come up. You may not need to do one of these for every field. Like one guy I talked to earlier this week said, I planted 620 acres in 3 days. Well, if that's all the same variety, all that rice is going to come up at the same time. So you don't have to necessarily do, a printout for every field if you don't want to. Some people like to have a notebook of every single field and records of it, including the DD50, but you don't have to. But just make sure that you've got an idea of when rice, if it comes up on a certain window there, that when that last date's going to be. So, run you a DD50, or at least have that emergence date if you want to run one later, just be able to do it. It's so easy to do nowadays. Used to, you had to fill out the card and get it to your extension office, and you can still do it that way if you want to. But you can do the DD50s over your cell phone now. It's very easy, and who doesn't play on their telephone, or at least have somebody on your farm that plays on their telephone all the time. If they're going to be playing on their telephone, well, make it productive and have them run some DD50s, and that way you'll have this data if you need it. So if you have any more questions about any of this, call me through Farmers Supply Association at 870-318-0739, or email me at randyklepechka@gmail.com. And this has been Randy Klepechka with your April report.